Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is Marianne Williamson. Marianne is an internationally acclaimed spiritual author and lecturer. 6 of her 10 published books have been on the New York Times bestseller list, with 4 reaching number 1. Her insight into return to love, which has become a classic, has profoundly affected our whole generation of seekers. In it, she wrote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." Marianne's other books include The Age of Miracles, Everyday Grace, A Woman's Worth, Illuminata, Healing the Soul of America, and The Gift of Change. And today we will discuss her newest book, The Law of Divine Compensation, on Work, Money, and Miracles, published by HarperCollins. Marianne, it's a real delight to have you with us. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Marianne, what inspired you to write The Law of Divine Compensation? You know, for all this talk about love and miracles, this book is remarkably grounded in real-world issues and really full of common sense.
Well, thank you. You know, the lectures that I give in Los Angeles and around the country and other places as well have to do with how to take the principles of a miracle-minded worldview and apply it in very practical ways. So the idea of a miracle is the idea of a shift in perception from fear to love. And that is not just some theological notion that remains separate from our worldly experience. Rather, what I write books about and talk about is miracles as applied to personal relationships, miracles as applied to health and healing, miracles as applied to politics, miracles as applied to weight loss, and so forth. So in this book, I had been giving a lecture in Los Angeles, and this was several months ago, maybe a year ago. It was when the recession was really at its most intense, and you could really feel a level of stress and tension and fear in the air that was unlike normal times. And one night I was talking about miracles, the idea of love is the bottom line in relation to our money and to our work, as well as relationship to everything else. And I thought to myself, we should have a conference call about this. So we just put it out that anybody who wanted to listen in could. And after that I thought, you know, this material is helpful. So we published it as a book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, love is a word that has been so overused and misused and confused. How are you using the word?
Well, love might be a word that is underused, that is overused, but it is a practice that is underused.
Indeed.
We don't have a world where there's too much love. We don't have a world where people are doing too much of the love thing. Quite the opposite. We have a world where people are doing too much of the fear thing, too much of the violence thing, too much of the fighting thing, too much of the war thing, too much of the greed thing, too much of the unkindness thing, too much of the unjust thing. So I think that's very important to remember. But love isn't just a word. It is a word that is a verb, and it is a practice. It is a participatory emotion. So when we talk about love in relation to work and money, it's one of those areas where we are aware that the cultural conversation, the conversation that dominates the world, puts all things spiritual in a very separate category. When we think of the bottom line when it comes to money, we think of money as the bottom line. But this book is about love as the bottom line. This is a book not about ambition, but about inspiration. This is a book about seeing our work as a way that we serve, as a way that we take the love that is in all our hearts and the power of that love that is in all of our hearts and use it, extend it into whatever work that we do. With you, this program, for me at this moment, this program, all of us do different things, but on a spiritual level, we're all here for a common purpose, and that is to take the greatness that lies in all of us through the spirit of that which is higher than any of us, and put it in service, in devotion, to a great healing of the planet. And this uplifts our personal energy, We do not come across as needy people then. We do not come across as greedy people then. We do not come across as people on the make, too tempted in far too many cases to manipulate and exploit people in situations in order to get what we want. It's a completely different way of filtering our views and our energies when we see ourselves not in a situation to get, but in a situation to give. And when we do that, our personal energy is different, and how other people experience us is different. And what the basic to this book is this concept that the universe is self-organizing. And when I say the universe is self-organizing, what I mean by that is that just as embryos turn into babies and acorns turn into oak trees and buds turn into blossoms, there is clearly an invisible patterning in nature. Now, most of us think of that patterning, the embryo turning into the baby, for instance, and we think of it as something that pretty much stops once we're plopped onto the earth as babies. Like, from this point forward, you're on your own. But from a spiritual perspective, the patterning is still there. It's just on an invisible plane. And the difference between you and me and the embryo, or you and me and the acorn, is that we can say no. When we say yes, that means that we consciously ask, whether in a secular context or in a spiritual or religious context, that we be used. May I be used. May my talents be used. May my resources be used, that I might contribute at the highest level. And when we do that, we align ourselves with this self-organizing and self-correcting universe. And what that means in practical terms is that we're more likely to get the job. We're more likely to get the customer. We're more likely to get a letter or a check out of the blue. We're more likely to experience ourselves on a very practical level inside that matrix of infinite possibility and constant breakthrough. And I hope that people feel when they read the book that the book helps guide their thinking in a way that allows all that to happen.
One of the things that I particularly liked was that you're talking about not waiting for circumstances outside of you to change or to compensate you, but to make that shift inside in order to be ready for it, in order to attract it.
That's a really important issue in the book, because usually when somebody thinks, let's say, of a job, people say, I need to go get a job. I need to find a job, as though it's out there somewhere. And one of the chapters in the book is called Job versus Calling. The idea that the calling, which is the deeper substance than just the job itself, emerges from within us. You know, I feel strongly that because women are only at this modern point in our history really able to share our own views, there have been aspects of the way we experience life that have not been part of the major conversation. And one of the things that is absolutely fundamental to the feminine experience is the idea that we give birth from inside ourselves, even biologically when a woman is pregnant. So the idea of a job is something outside me. The idea of a calling is something that arises organically from inside me. And so once you accept that that genius lies in all of us, that there is a genius of infinite power and possibility that lies inside all of us. We don't all have the same talents. We don't all have the same abilities, but we all have the same power inside us that leads, if we allow it to the emergence of fantastic possibilities. And when we live from that place, then it's not that we have to go get this or get that, but that we literally attract to us. You know, there's people talk about the difference between dynamic power and magnetic power. Dynamic is I have what it takes to go out there and get something. Magnetic power is there's something about me that attracts situations, that makes people want to come to me, that makes me, when I walk into a situation or I walk into a meeting, more likely to find myself in a situation where others want to work with me or want to invest in my project and so forth. So thank you for mentioning that. It's very true, and I think a very important part of the book, that it's less about what's out there and more about what's in here.
And it really is kind of turning a mental switch. I really loved that idea of viewing your work as a calling, because you can either pursue your innate talents and make that your calling, or you can do a mental switch and view what you do every day in a sacred way and see it as a calling rather than a job.
Well, what's so great about the part, excuse me, what's so great about what you just said is the realization that then you can never be unemployed. That even if you lose a job, your employment, once you see yourself as here as a kind of ambassador of all that is good about humanity as it flows through you, you realize that that job was given you the day you were born. And that whether or not you have a job as the world defines it, you are always employed by a kind of divine employer, and you can't get fired. So the person that you are every day, how you behave, how you treat people, we tend to think, what am I going to do today, when it would behoove us to ask more often, who am I going to be today? And then we realize that every single day we have the best job in the world, and that is being the best version of ourselves that we are capable of.
Oh, I just love that. Now, the title of your book is The Law of Divine Compensation. So it kind of begs the question, is someone up there keeping score?
Well, someone up there, first of all, time and space are illusions of consciousness, as Einstein said. So no one's up there in space, but someone is up there in terms of the higher regions of our consciousness. And it's not a someone, but it is a law. It's called cause and effect. In the East, it's called karma. And yeah, it is a law, just like gravity is a law. The law of thermodynamics is a law. And it holds that every thought takes form on some level, and that for every cause there is an effect. And in that sense, the universe keeps a perfect set of books. So in that sense, if you ask, is something keeping score, I don't know about the something or the someone, but is a score being kept? Actually, yes. Mm-hmm. I remember I used to argue with my daughter when she was a little girl. I was the only parent trying to convince my daughter. When my daughter came home, she was a little girl, and she said, "My friends tell me there is no Santa Claus." And I said, I cannot be responsible for what your friends' parents told you, but I am telling you, there is a Santa Claus. There is a principle in this universe that knows when you've been good, knows when you've been bad, and knows when you've been good. And when you're good, the gifts will be coming to you accordingly. And if your friends say there's no Santa Claus, they can say there's no Santa Claus. But I'm telling you, in that sense, there is.
Well, you also say that our problems, this is kind of what I associate with Eastern religions, that our problems in the mortal world are only illusions. And they tend to feel pretty real to us. So what do you mean by that?
Well, from a metaphysical perspective, the idea here is that it's as though there are two parallel universes. And one universe is the three-dimensional realities that we all experience of life. But beyond the world, beyond the universe that is perceived by the physical senses, is a world that is not perceived with the physical senses, but it is the higher reality. It is the reality with a capital R. And in that universe, all things are perfect. Now, the problem we have is that living in this mortal world, we are trained to think that the world that we perceive with our physical senses is not only more real than the world that the heart perceives, but that it is actually, to many people, the belief is that it's the only world. Well, the problem here is that the world of the three dimensions is a world of scarcity and lack. It's a world where if you have, there's less for me. If I have, there's less for you. You and I are different, therefore you and I must compete. And there are a lot of us here, so in order for me to win, I really have to struggle to get ahead. Oh, and by the way, it's pretty short, and at the end of it, I get sick and die. And if that's what you perceive of the world, and that's what you live into, there's a lot of suffering there. And there is a lot of suffering. And obviously, while we can live in that place, the whole point of a spiritual search is for a different place within our being, a different idea of what is true in the universe, and then a different place to live into and a different set of experiences to have because of that. So that other world is a world in which there is infinite supply. There is no scarcity. It's not like if you have more, there's less for me. Rather, if you live to your highest, in your highest place, there's actually a greater possibility of my living in the highest place. And in that world, there is no competition between us. There is collaboration between us. And we are led to each other just as the cells in the body are led to each other for purposes of collaboration.